This is my true story. I worked my whole life, every bone aching, every shift long, just so my son could have the life I never had. I thought my sacrifice would earn me respect in my old age. But one evening, after I asked him to help me with groceries, he looked me in the eye and said, "You earn nothing. You deserve nothing." His words broke me. I lowered my head in silence, but deep inside, something changed. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I planned. And what I did next will shock you. Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from, and please subscribe so my stories can reach more people. I was never a rich man, but I was a hard-working man. From the day my son was born, my world shifted. Every thought I had, every decision I made, circled back to him. I wanted him to have everything I didn't. I wanted him to grow up with opportunities, with comfort, with security. So I worked. Long shifts at the factory, overtime whenever it was offered, even weekends when my body begged for rest. I came home exhausted most nights, my clothes stained with sweat and oil, my back screaming, my hands raw. But when I saw his little face light up, I told myself it was all worth it. My pain was nothing compared to his future. When he was a boy, he never saw me eat the smallest portion on my plate because I made sure he had the biggest. He never knew how many nights I went to bed hungry so he could eat his fill. He never noticed the holes in my shoes or the patches in my jacket because I made sure he had new ones when he needed them. Birthdays, Christmas, even small school events. I always found a way to give him something, even if it meant I went without. That was my job as his father, to give, to sacrifice, to protect. I paid for his schooling from the very beginning. I wanted him to learn, to rise above the hard life I had endured. When teachers suggested tutoring, I paid for it. When he showed an interest in sports, I found the money for uniforms and fees. I worked extra hours to cover it, sometimes falling asleep standing on the assembly line, but I never complained. I told myself he would grow up proud of me, that he would understand someday what it took to give him the life he had. When he turned 16, he begged me for a car. I didn't have the money, not really. But I found a way. I scraped together every dollar, worked double shifts, and bought him a used car that ran well enough. The look on his face when I handed him the keys made me feel like the richest man in the world. He didn't know I had spent months saving, sacrificing every comfort, every small joy for myself. I didn't care. His happiness was my reward. Later, when he wanted to start his own business, he came to me again. "Dad, I need money," he said, as if it were nothing. I opened my savings I had quietly built over decades, money I had thought I might use to rest in my old age. Without hesitation, I gave it to him. Every cent. Because I believed in him. Because I believed he would not just succeed, but also remember who had believed in him when no one else did. I thought this business would make him proud, make him respect me even more. Through all those years, I never complained, not once. Even when my body broke down, even when my hands shook with arthritis, even when my lungs wheezed from years of labor, I carried on. I told myself it was all worth it because I was building something greater than myself. I was building his life. My son was not just my child. He was my legacy. He was the living proof that my years of struggle, of sacrifice, had meaning. I would sit sometimes in the evenings when he was out with his friends or busy with his work, and I would smile to myself. I thought, one day he will look at me and say thank you. One day he will stand by me in my old age, proud to call me his father. One day he will see me not as a burden, but as the man who gave him everything. That thought carried me through the darkest nights, through the loneliest hours, through the aching of my body and soul. He was my proudest achievement, not the house I bought, not the money I saved, not the years of work I endured. Him, my son. I thought he was my greatest success, and I thought foolishly that he would always honor that. The first cracks began to show when my son tasted success. At first, I was proud of him. His business started to take off, money began to flow, and he carried himself with the confidence of a man who had built something. I thought finally, all the sacrifices were worth it. I thought he would look at me with gratitude, remembering how I had helped him climb to that point. But instead of gratitude, I began to see something else. Arrogance. It started small. He would dismiss little things I said, laughing as if I didn't know what I was talking about. If I tried to give him advice, he would wave his hand and say, "Dad, times have changed. Your way doesn't work anymore." He stopped asking me for guidance, stopped listening altogether. At first, I told myself it was normal. Children grow up, they want to make their own way. I swallowed the sting and kept quiet. But then the words sharpened. He began mocking me for being retired. "You just sit around all day," he said once, smirking. "You don't earn anything. You don't even know what hard work looks like anymore." Those words cut me deeply because I had worked harder than he could ever imagine. My body carried the scars of labor. My hands were twisted from years of gripping tools. My back was bent from decades of lifting, carrying, building. Every part of me was worn down because I had poured my strength into his life. And yet, to him, it was nothing. When family or friends came around, he would boast loudly about his success, about his money, about his future. He would sit tall, talking about investments and profits, while I sat quietly in the corner. Sometimes, just to amuse himself, he would make little jabs at me. "Dad doesn't understand business," he'd say. "He comes from another time." Everyone would laugh politely, but I could feel their eyes flick toward me, waiting for my reaction. I never gave one. I lowered my head, stayed silent, and told myself it wasn't worth a fight. The arrogance didn't stop there. He started to look down on simple things I did. If I brought him food from the market, he'd sneer at it, saying he could afford better. If I wore my old jacket, he'd laugh and ask why I didn't buy something new. He didn't see the history in that jacket, how many winters it had carried me through, how many mornings I had walked to work in the freezing cold with that cloth as my only shield. To him, it was just another sign that I was outdated. He surrounded himself with new friends, wealthy ones, people who lived in big houses and drove expensive cars. Around them, I was invisible. Worse than invisible, I was a reminder of where he came from, something he wanted to bury. When I tried to join in conversations, he brushed me aside, embarrassed by me. The boy who once held my hand in the market now looked at me like I was dead weight. Still, I stayed quiet. I told myself it was just immaturity, that success had clouded his judgment. But one day, he would wake up and remember who had carried him to that point. I thought perhaps he was just going through a phase, drunk on money and pride. I believed, foolishly, that time would soften him, that my patience would be rewarded. But deep inside, I could feel the shift. The respect I had dreamed of in my old age, the respect I thought I had earned with every drop of sweat and every scar, was slipping further and further away. And though I didn't say it out loud, I began to fear the truth. Maybe my son would never respect me. Maybe he had forgotten everything I had given. Maybe he had already decided I was nothing. It happened one evening. A small moment that should have meant nothing, but it changed everything. I had just come back from the market, carrying 2 heavy bags of groceries. My back ached, my knees hurt with every step, but I managed to bring them inside. I set them down on the counter and asked my son if he could help me put them away. A simple request, something any son could do for his father without thinking. But instead of helping, he looked at me with annoyance, as if I had interrupted something more important. His friends were sitting in the living room, laughing, drinking, enjoying themselves. He didn't want to get up. I asked again, this time softer. "Son, could you give me a hand with these bags?" That's when it came, sharp, loud, and cruel. He turned his head toward me and said, You earn nothing. You deserve nothing. The room went silent for a moment. His friends shifted awkwardly, some giving small, nervous laughs, unsure of what to do. I stood frozen, the sting of his words hitting harder than any blow I had ever taken. I had been insulted before in my life. I had been called poor, useless, weak, but nothing compared to hearing those words from my own flesh and blood. I lowered my head, staring at the bags of groceries. My hands shook slightly as I began to put them away myself. No one moved to help me. No one spoke up for me. My son just leaned back on the couch, smirking, proud of the wound he had inflicted. To him, I wasn't his father anymore. I wasn't the man who had sacrificed everything for him. I was just an old man in his house, someone to mock, someone to belittle. The words echoed in my head long after they were spoken. You earn nothing. You deserve nothing. He couldn't have known how deep those words cut. He couldn't have known that every memory of sacrifice, every moment of hunger I endured so he could eat, every back-breaking shift I worked so he could live comfortably, came rushing back in that instant. And for the first time in my life, I felt not just pain, but emptiness. I remembered the nights I came home so tired I could barely walk, yet still found the energy to help him with his homework. I remembered the mornings I left before sunrise, not seeing him again until late at night, all so he could have a roof over his head and shoes on his feet. I remembered handing him the keys to his first car, his smile so wide it lit up the whole street, while I stood there knowing it had cost me months of saving and sacrifice. And now, the same boy I had given everything to looked at me and said I deserved nothing. His friends laughed softly again, trying to break the tension, but I could feel the pity in their eyes. They didn't see a proud father. They saw a broken old man humiliated in his own home. My son made sure of that. I didn't argue. I didn't shout back. I didn't defend myself. I quietly finished putting away the groceries and then went to sit alone at the table. My food tasted like dust in my mouth. My dignity felt shattered. The one person in the world I thought would honor me had turned me into a joke. That night, I sat in silence long after everyone else had gone to bed. I replayed the words over and over. You earn nothing. You deserve nothing. The more I thought about them, the more something inside me began to change. The pain was still there, sharp and raw, but beneath it something else was forming. Something colder, something harder. A realization I had avoided all these years. My son didn't see me as a father anymore. He saw me as nothing. And maybe it was time I gave him exactly what he thought I deserved. Nothing. That night, after those words left his mouth, I ate alone at the kitchen table. The laughter of his friends still echoed faintly from the other room, but I heard nothing except his voice in my head. You earn nothing. You deserve nothing. I pushed the food around my plate without tasting it. My throat was too tight, my stomach too heavy. I swallowed my pride in silence, but inside, something was breaking. I remembered years ago, when I would come home with just enough food for one proper meal. I used to pretend I wasn't hungry so he could eat every bite. I told him I had already eaten at work, when in truth, my stomach was empty. I would sit at the same table, watching him eat with a smile, convincing myself it was worth it. That was what a father did. He sacrificed. He endured. And I endured gladly because I believed love and respect would grow from those sacrifices. But sitting there alone, humiliated by my own child, those memories felt like ashes. Every long night I starved. Every cold morning I walked to work without proper shoes. Every dollar I saved only to give it all to him. All of it felt meaningless in the face of his cruelty. He didn't see me as a man who gave him everything. He saw me as a man who had nothing left to give. I sat with my plate half full, the clock ticking in the background, and I felt my dignity shatter piece by piece. The son I had built my life around now treated me like an inconvenience, a shadow in his house, a burden he wished he could throw away. He had said those words in front of others, not caring how they cut me open, not caring that his mockery stripped me of every ounce of pride I had left. I lowered my head and said nothing, because what could I say? No argument would change the way he saw me. No speech about my sacrifices would reach the ears of a man who had already decided his father was worthless. Silence was my only weapon, and even that felt weak. But inside, where he couldn't see, something hardened. Pain turned to steel. His words replayed again and again, but each time, they sounded less like humiliation and more like a challenge. You deserve nothing. Very well, I thought. If that was what he believed, then I would give him exactly that. The boy who had once clung to my hand when he was afraid, the boy I had carried on my shoulders when he was small, was gone. In his place stood a man blinded by pride, drunk on arrogance, unable to see the truth of who had built the foundation under his feet. He thought I was powerless. He thought I had nothing left to offer, no strength, no control, no value. But he had forgotten one thing: the life he stood on, the comfort he lived in, the wealth he enjoyed. All of it came from me. And though I sat quietly at that table with my head bowed in humiliation, I knew something he didn't. I still held the keys to everything. As I sat alone in that silence, his words cutting through me, another thought began to rise, one that gave me strength. My son had forgotten the truth. He strutted around the house as if everything already belonged to him, as if my years of work and sacrifice had automatically passed into his hands. He acted like the house was his, the accounts were his, the investments were his, as though I were already gone. But the truth was simple. None of it belonged to him. Not yet. Not ever, unless I chose it. Every deed, every bank account, every piece of property was still in my name. My signature, not his. My blood, not his. He may have lived in the comfort of it, but he did not own it. He only borrowed it because I allowed him to. He walked through these rooms because I had built them. He slept under this roof because I had paid for it. And he ate at this table because I had filled it. He forgot that nothing in his life had been earned without me. He assumed it was all just waiting for him, that inheritance was his birthright. He bragged about it sometimes, even in front of me. One day this will all be mine, he'd say with a smirk, as though I were already dead and buried. His arrogance blinded him to the fact that as long as I breathed, every paper, every signature, every coin was still under my control. That realization steadied me. I was not powerless. I was not the nothing he claimed I was. I was the foundation, and if I chose, I could take it all away from him. He had mocked me, humiliated me, told me I deserved nothing. But what he didn't know was that I still had the final say. His arrogance had made him careless, certain of a future that was never promised. And in that carelessness, he had given me the sharpest weapon of all: choice. I remembered my stepson then, a boy who was never truly mine by blood, but who always treated me with respect. He never had the advantages my son enjoyed. He didn't get the car, the business loan, the endless sacrifices. But he always greeted me with kindness. He always thanked me, even for the smallest things. He called me Dad, even when he didn't have to. And in that moment of clarity, I realized the truth my son had buried in his arrogance. Respect matters more than blood. The future didn't have to belong to the son who mocked me. The future could belong to the one who honored me. My son had said I deserved nothing. Maybe he was right. Maybe I didn't deserve his cruelty, his mockery, his entitlement. But I did deserve peace. I did deserve respect. And if that respect came from another son, then so be it. The truth was now a weapon in my hands. My son thought he held all the power, that his success gave him the right to treat me like I was invisible. But he had forgotten that every dollar he counted on, every stone of the house he stood in, still belonged to me, and I had the power to decide where it would go when I was gone. That thought hardened inside me like iron. He believed I was nothing, but the truth was, I was everything. I was the one man who could take it all away from him, and soon I would. The next morning, I rose earlier than usual. My body still ached, my heart still heavy from his cruel words, but my mind was sharper than it had been in years. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, staring at the sunlight creeping through the window, and I knew what I had to do. No more silence, no more humiliation. It was time to act. I picked up the phone and called my lawyer. He had known me for many years, had seen me through struggles and victories, and when he heard my voice, he asked if everything was all right. I told him simply, "I need to make some changes." He didn't question it. He set an appointment for that very day. Walking into that office, I felt a strange mixture of pain and resolve. The walls were lined with shelves of books, the desk stacked with papers, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small. I felt in control. My lawyer sat across from me, pen in hand, and I explained everything. I told him I wanted my son's name removed from every will, every trust, every plan for inheritance. His eyes widened slightly, but he didn't argue. He just nodded and began preparing the documents. One by one, the papers were placed before me. One by one, I read the lines, each word pulling away a piece of the future my arrogant son thought was guaranteed. Then I signed. My hand shook slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of what I was doing. Each stroke of the pen was both an ending and a beginning. I was erasing him, not from my blood, but from my legacy. But I didn't stop there. I knew exactly who deserved what my son had thrown away. I named my stepson, the boy my son mocked, ridiculed, treated like an outsider, the one who had always treated me with dignity, the one who had never asked for more than I could give, but who always gave back respect in return. As I signed the transfer of everything into his name, I felt a sense of satisfaction I hadn't felt in years. My house, my accounts, my investments, everything was no longer tied to the son who told me I was nothing. It was tied to the one who saw me as something. For the first time in decades, I felt I had chosen not just with duty, but with justice. The lawyer looked at me after the final paper was signed and said, "Are you sure about this?" I met his eyes without hesitation. I've never been more sure. Walking out of that office, the weight on my shoulders was lighter. My son believed he had broken me. He believed his words had left me powerless. But the truth was, his cruelty had woken me up. He had handed me the reason I needed to act. And now, everything he believed was his future had slipped from his grasp, and he didn't even know it yet. As I walked down the street, I almost smiled. For the first time, I felt free from his arrogance. I had made my decision, and one day soon, he would learn just how final it was. After that day at the lawyer's office, I went back home and carried on as if nothing had changed. My son had no idea what I had done. To him, life moved forward exactly the same. To me, every moment with him now carried a hidden truth, one he would not discover until it was far too late. He would sit at the table, boasting about his business deals, bragging about the future he believed was already his. He would talk about when I inherit this house, or when the accounts are finally mine. Each time, I nodded quietly, listening without interruption. Inside, I almost laughed. He had no idea he was speaking into an empty future, building castles on sand. He thought the world belonged to him, but I had already taken it away with the stroke of a pen. Sometimes he would mock his stepbrother in front of me. "He'll never be anything," he sneered once, sipping his drink. "Not like me. I'm the one carrying this family forward." I looked at him in silence, my face calm, my heart steady, but deep down, I felt something cold and strong. satisfaction. He didn't know that the very man he insulted was the one who would inherit everything he thought was his. Every cruel word he spoke only made me more certain I had made the right choice. Weeks passed like this. Outwardly, I remained the quiet old man at the edge of his life. I kept my head bowed when he dismissed me, kept my voice low when he ignored me. He believed I had accepted my place in his shadow, powerless and humiliated. But beneath that mask of silence, I carried the truth like a hidden blade. At night, I would sit in my room and think about the future. Not his future, but mine. For the first time in years, I felt I had secured my dignity. I had taken back control of the story he thought he had already written, and though he still strutted and mocked, I knew the day would come when his arrogance would collapse in on itself. I watched him carefully in those weeks, studying every boast, every smirk, every cruel word. He had no suspicion. He was too sure of himself, too blinded by his own pride. And I realized that this was the perfect revenge, not loud, not immediate, but patient, silent. Let him laugh. Let him boast. Let him believe. Every day he did so made the truth waiting for him even sharper, even more devastating. It was the calm before the storm, and I was content to let the storm build. The storm finally broke when my son decided to confront the lawyer about his inheritance. I don't know what made him do it that day. Maybe his arrogance had swelled too high. Maybe he wanted to flaunt it in front of his friends again, or maybe he simply wanted reassurance that his future was secure. Whatever the reason, he walked into that office certain of his power and walked out stripped of it. The call came to me in the evening. His voice was not calm or proud like usual. It was wild, frantic, full of rage. "What the hell is this?" he shouted into the phone. "The lawyer says everything. The house, the accounts, the investments. They've all been transferred. To him. To my stepbrother. How could you do this to me?" I sat there in my chair, listening to the fury in his voice. For years, I had sat in silence while he mocked me, humiliated me, dismissed me. For years, I had bitten my tongue and lowered my head. But not now. Now it was his turn to feel powerless. He kept yelling, his words sharp and desperate. "You can't do this. You can't take everything away from me. This is mine. It's supposed to be mine." His entitlement spilled out with every word. He wasn't grieving what he lost. He wasn't even surprised. Deep down, he had always believed it was already his. That was the root of his arrogance. The belief that my sacrifice gave him ownership of my life's work. Finally, when his voice cracked with anger, I spoke. Calm, steady, without a tremor. "You said I earned nothing. You said I deserve nothing. And you were right. That is why I gave you exactly that." The line went silent for a moment. He didn't know how to answer. The weight of his own words came back to crush him. I could almost hear the realization dawning on him, the memory of the cruelty he had spat at me now turned into his reality. Then came the screaming again, louder, more broken, but it didn't matter anymore. I didn't listen. I didn't argue. I simply hung up the phone and let the silence end the conversation. That night, I sat back in my chair and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. My revenge wasn't fire and shouting. It wasn't a public humiliation. It was simple, quiet justice. He had spoken his truth, that I deserved nothing, and I gave it back to him exactly as he demanded. After the call ended, I knew the news would spread quickly, and it did. My son's rage could not be contained. He shouted to anyone who would listen that I had betrayed him, that I had taken away what was rightfully his. But people didn't look at him with sympathy. They looked at him with pity, and some with quiet satisfaction. For years, they had watched his arrogance grow, his pride tower over everyone around him. Now the tower had fallen, and the dust cloud reached every corner of his life. The whispers began in the family first. His cousins, his aunts, his uncles, they all heard the story. Some said, he had it coming. Others said, a man should honor his father. Few defended him because everyone had seen how he treated me. They remembered the dinners where he mocked me. They remembered the way he dismissed me in public. They remembered the words he said, the tone he used, the arrogance that filled every room he entered. His downfall was not shocking to them. It was justice. Then the whispers spread further, through his circle of friends, through the community. People who once envied his success now shook their heads at the way he had lost everything. The man who bragged the loudest was now the man with nothing, and worst of all, the one he despised the most, his stepbrother, was the one who inherited it all. My son couldn't bear it. His pride crumbled. He called me again and again, not with anger this time, but with desperation. His messages shifted from rage to pleading. Dad, please, we can fix this. Please don't do this to me. I'm your son. But the damage was already done. He had spoken his truth to me once. I deserved nothing. Now he was living the truth I had given back to him. So did he. Meanwhile, my stepson rose quietly into the place I had given him. He didn't boast, didn't mock, didn't gloat. He thanked me with tears in his eyes, promising to honor what I had entrusted to him. He treated me with the respect I had longed for all my life. While my blood sun sank deeper into bitterness, the sun of my heart lifted me with gratitude. The aftermath was simple but final. My true heir had revealed himself, not through blood, but through respect. And my arrogant son, the one who thought he was untouchable, was left with nothing but the echo of his own cruelty. These days, my life is quiet. My mornings begin with the sound of the sea, the waves rolling steady against the shore. I live in a small home now, comfortable, bought with the security I worked for all my life. No voices mocking me, no heavy silence of humiliation. Just peace. The kind of peace I thought I would never know in my old age. My stepson visits often. He comes with his children, and they run through the house with laughter in their voices. He sits with me at the table, listening, asking for advice, not because he needs it, but because he respects me enough to value my words. Sometimes he brings me gifts, small things, thoughtful things, and always says thank you for the life I gave him. His gratitude is quiet, but it is real, and it fills the cracks my own son left in my heart. As for my son, he no longer visits. The calls have stopped. At first, they were full of rage. Then came the pleas. Then silence. I don't know where he spends his days now, and I no longer ask. The man who once shouted that I deserved nothing now sits in the shadow of his own words. He believed inheritance was a right, but he learned too late that respect was the only true key to legacy. Do I regret it? I regret nothing. For years, I gave him everything, my time, my strength, my sacrifices, my money. And when all of it meant nothing to him, I finally gave him exactly what he said I deserved. Nothing. He cannot claim I was unfair. He cannot say I was cruel. I only returned his truth to him. Now, when I walk down the street, people greet me warmly. They say, "You did the right thing." Some whisper about how harsh it must have felt, but I smile quietly. Because only I know the pain of hearing those words from your own child, words that cut deeper than any knife. You earn nothing, you deserve nothing. Once spoken, they can never be taken back. My peace is not in wealth, but in dignity. I used the strength I had left to protect my own worth, to prove that I was not powerless, not invisible, not broken. And in the end, I found the justice I was denied for so long. Final thought, he said I deserved nothing, so I gave him exactly that.